Barnabas was a regular Christian who was such an encouragement to others that the apostles changed his name to reflect this. We can read about him throughout the book of Acts, but when we first learn of him, he is introduced to us as Joseph. In Acts 4, verses 36 and 37, it says, "Now Joseph, a Levite of Cyprian birth, who was also called Barnabas by the apostles," which translated means son of encouragement, "and who owned a tract of land, sold it, and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet." Barnabas is probably the most well-known individual that we will discuss in this series of lessons. While he is not an obscure character, he certainly is a secondary character, yet he distinguished himself as a son of encouragement. There are several events recorded in which Barnabas earned this nickname. In each of these, he provided encouragement by removing sources of discouragement. In these examples, Christians in Barnabas' company faced situations which were disheartening and threatened to erode their faith. Today I want you to consider some of the situations that Barnabas encountered and how he provided the encouragement that his brethren needed. We see times when there was uncertainty over physical necessities. When we first meet Barnabas, it was at a time when many brethren who were in need. Jews had traveled from throughout the world to be present at Jerusalem for the day of Pentecost. Those who obeyed the gospel remained there, and they were there longer than they planned to stay because they wanted to learn more about the gospel. Naturally, their provisions would have run out and they would be in need. It would be discouraging for them to learn that the Messiah had finally come, commit to being his disciples, and then not be able to feed themselves while trying to learn as much as they could about his teachings. So all who were owners of land or houses would sell them and bring the proceeds of the sales and lay them at the apostles' feet, and they would be distributed to each as any had need. Acts 4, verses 34 and 35. Barnabas was involved in this sacrificial work, taking away these disciples' uncertainty about their physical necessities. Also, we see rejection or mistrust of a new Christian by his new brethren. After Saul was converted in Damascus in Acts 9, verses 8 through 18, he returned to Jerusalem and was trying to associate with the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple. Saul had a very promising future before him in Judaism, yet he sacrificed all of that in order to follow Christ. Now, how discouraging would it have been to have given all of that up and then not be accepted by his new brethren? Friends, social ties are strong, and many people under normal circumstances leave the faith to return to their family and friends in the world. But Barnabas stepped in to help Saul on this occasion, and he vouched for him before the apostles so that he would be accepted by the church. Also, we see a cultural and historical divide between Jews and Gentiles that threatened church unity. And it was in the church at Antioch where the disciples were first called Christians, Acts 11 and verse 26. This church was made up of both Jews and Gentiles, two groups that historically were hostile toward one another, Ephesians 2, verses 11 through 19. And because of this, there would be people within the church and outside the church who would try to drive a wedge between these brethren. Well, Barnabas arrived in Acts 11 and verse 23 to encourage them all with resolute heart to remain true to the Lord. Later, he and Paul had great dissension and debate with those who tried to cause trouble in the church at Antioch in Acts 15, verses 1 through 2. And rather than dividing into two separate groups, a situation that would have been truly discouraging to the local brethren and all that heard about it, the church at Antioch continued together and was a powerful force for good in the cause of Christ. But also there were times when there was a loss of trust due to prior failure. Shortly after Paul and Barnabas began their first preaching tour, John Mark left them and returned to Jerusalem, Acts 13 and verse 13. When he wanted to go with them on their second trip, Paul evidently did not trust him after his prior desertion and refused to allow him to go. And while we can probably understand Paul's reluctance to bring John Mark with them, we should also be able to understand how discouraging it would be for one like John Mark to make a mistake like he did and not be given the chance to make it right. Barnabas stood up for him, even though it meant separating from Paul and taking John Mark to labor with him in Cyprus. There are many different kinds of discouraging situations that we and our brethren will face, and it's important for us to be able to provide a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moment. Ephesians 4 and verse 29. Just like Barnabas, we have opportunities where we as regular Christians can be an encouragement to those that we come into contact with. Friends, we thank you for joining us today. We pray that you have a blessed day and a wonderful weekend.